Well, welcome to Norfolk, and today we are in the Blickling estate, part of the National Trust Blickling Hall parkland. And the building we've come to show you this afternoon is the parish church of St Andrews, tucked up on a hill just to the eastern aspect of the fantastic and historic Blickling Hall. This is one of my favourite views of the parish church in Hall, but it's not a view many visitors get to appreciate. It's a bit tucked away, this footpath that we're on today, known only by the local dog walkers. The majority of people visiting Blickling Hall tend to miss the church altogether, as it's screened, as you can see from this aspect, very well by a mature planting of sycamores, oaks and some yew trees. So let's go and explore St Andrews and show you some of the hidden treasures inside this beautiful building. So we've made our way over the road towards Blickling Hall, and this is the original old signage for St Andrews at Blickling. The church itself sits in quite an elevated position. There's not much of the medieval church building left on show. What you can see was largely built in the Victorian era. In fact, St Andrews, as you see here today, was almost completely remodelled. The main chancellor was designed by Butterfield and completed in the 1850s. And then 20 years later, in the 1870s, the tower was designed by an architect called Street. Now, the architecture has been criticised as being Victorian urban in style. And there's very little, as I say, of the medieval original building on show here. This buttressed, formalised architecture is quite typical of the era. The materials aren't, though. This is knapped flint. Let me show you that in closer detail. This building material is quite characteristic of formal church architecture in this area. They're made of flints collected locally and then flattened or cut off in a process called butting. It makes a more or less flat wall, and then it's used as infill behind the formal stone or cut stone structures that have been used to build this church. This is the main entrance, the southern face and door, behind a pigeon guard, Victorian tile work on the floor and some cut stone seating in between. Let's go inside and explore this church. This entrance is the original medieval door. The ironwork and woodwork, absolutely incredible. Just look at some of the features on this. This was retained when the church underwent its architectural redesign and rebuild in the 1850s. It's one of the original surviving medieval pieces in this building. You're greeted by a direct view of the font. This is one of the most beautiful carved pieces in this church. Let's just have a look at these lions. This is one of the original 15th century surviving pieces of architecture. The carving is beautiful. There is the remnants of the paintwork that would have been applied onto this originally. These were often painted in quite bright colours. Detailing is absolutely spectacular. The font cover is carved wood, oak, and depicts a stork on a nest with a chick being fed. There's more of that fantastic floor tiling in here and some wonderful ironwork, grills covering the heating. There are also some monuments which we'll explore further in a couple of minutes. But this building warrants a look up. Just look at that ceiling timber, often described as upturned ships, these buildings, and on the coast they often contain ship's timbers. But this one's likely to be all local oak, harvested on the Blickling estate when this building was refurbed effectively in 1850. In the south aisle is this memorial tomb coffin to Sir Edward Clere. There are 16 shields depicted around this tomb coffin. Again, you can just make out the colouring that was once applied in bright pigment along this memorial. Clere was born on the 15th of June 1536, and he was the third son of Sir John Clere. Now, as a third son, you wouldn't expect him to have much in terms of patronage, but fate left Clere to inherit both his father's estate and later to inherit major lands from his other relative. Now, the other large memorial coffin in this church of St Andrews is this much later one, William Schomberg Robert, 8th Marquis of Lothian. This is his memorial coffin, but this is empty. He is actually buried in Scotland. This is a replica or duplicate of the memorial. This memorial, as depicted there, was erected by his widow. His actual body lies at Jedburgh Abbey in Scotland. The sculpture of these incredible pieces is F. Watts, R.A., and it's dated 1878. Now, also in this church are some quite incredible medieval brasses. These actually aren't the original pieces. These are replicas that were created in the 1960s and 70s. At this time there was a fashion for brass rubbing, but the church was worried that the fashion was going to cause damage to the originals, so these replicas were created to allow people to come and rub brasses without damaging the original pieces. There's an interesting memorial here in the chancel of the church here at St Andrews. This is a memorial to Elizabeth Gurdon. The memorial was erected by Edward Clere. She was a 17-year-old girl who died of a cold while visiting him at the Blickling estate. We tried researching Elizabeth Gurdon to find out more of who she was and why she was visiting Blickling in 1582. But there's very little to be found out about her. There's a little bit of information. If anybody cares to translate this for us, we'd be very, very interested. St Andrews contains some beautiful stained glass. This is one of the most spectacular windows on the west aspect. In the chancel there is also a north-facing smaller window and a larger southern-facing piece, but the rest of the glass in this church is plain. Some of the most spectacular floor tiling is on the approach to the altar in the chancel. These probably predate the alterations done in the Victorian era. They're almost majolica in nature, some of these, textured. Absolutely beautiful and quite extensive, and then back onto the surrounding infill, which probably is Victorian. Church also contains plenty of 17th and 18th century memorial stonework. I find it incredible to read a lot of these, particularly when you see 19-year-old, 3 months. Even counted the days of this poor young girl's life. On the south aisle are some of the original brasses, discreetly covered up by pieces of carpet to prevent them being rubbed. These are proper medieval brasses and date from the 16th century. The northern door is again a remaining medieval piece of wooden oak, still in situ, with a modern curtain to try and keep the drafts out, because the framework to this door is almost non-existent. It's got its ancient bolts still in place. Just look at the beautiful detailing, some blacksmiths applied to that. Very, very simple retaining bolts on that, but beautiful in its naive form. The bell tower, the entrance to which is up that ladder, across that west facing window and through that doorway, contains a single bell which is rung for ceremonial purposes, weddings, funerals, Sunday worship. Beautifully formed floor to that piece and the ceiling above the font. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed this brief tour of this fantastic old English country church. We've just brought you outside to show you in the distance there the old rectory, built in Victorian times in a style to match the Blickling Hall red brick, and at the back the old cemetery, rather beautiful in its semi-neglect, wilderness or wilding. These old gravestones, something very peaceful about them, all on their angles with overgrown ivy and the willows and yew trees and hazel starting to encroach on this lovely old churchyard. So I hope you've enjoyed our visit this afternoon to St Andrews. I hope you have enjoyed some of the contents of this church, and if you do get the opportunity to visit, please do consider coming and having a walk around not just the Blickling Hall and estate here, which are all part of the National Trust estates, but also this beautiful rural parish church.